Hey guys, tonight we're going to sink deep into the icy, bone-rattling chill of a medieval winter, where the cold doesn't just nip your nose, it takes your dignity, your sleep, and maybe even a toe or two. Picture it. You wake up in a one-room cottage. Your breath fogs the air like a ghost trying to escape. Your blanket is a thin, scratchy wool sheet that smells like the family goat. Your nose is frozen. Your knees are cold. And your soul? She's packed up and gone south weeks ago. You're about to spend the next few months wondering if your fingers still count as fingers or if you should start naming your frostbite. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and what time you're watching. Are you curled up warm or surviving your own modern version of the Dark Ages? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge outside, snow up to your calves, sky the color of lead. Every step crunches with the sound of someone walking through dried bones. Your boots are barely boots, more like stitched-together regrets. And that muffling silence? It's beautiful until the wind reminds you it's there and slaps you across the face. Winter has arrived, and it's not here to play. Mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, winters were significantly harsher during the period known as the Little Ice Age, roughly 1300 to 1850. Crop failures, famine, and bitter cold weren't rare. They were the seasonal norm. Your house isn't insulated. Not even close. Wattle and daub, baby. That's mud smeared between sticks. It looks cute on a postcard. It feels like living inside a wet loaf of bread when the snow starts falling sideways. The roof leaks. The walls sweat. The wind howls like it's trying to tell you secrets you don't want to hear. You wrap yourself tighter in your cloak, which is basically a damp rug with a hood. Beneath that, you've layered everything you own. A tunic. Another tunic. Maybe even a third tunic if you're feeling wealthy today. But cold still seeps in, like it has a grudge. Your fingers ache. Your toes tingle. Not in the good way. You scurry back inside. The fire's out. Of course it is. The embers blink up at you, apologetically. No one kept the fire going last night. Your cousin was supposed to. She fell asleep. Again, you'd yell at her, but your lips are too numb to form sentences. You pile straw on the hearth, then some kindling. You blow. Harder. You whisper threats at the fire. It sparks, it dies, it sparks again. Eventually, blessedly, it catches. A tiny flame. You crouch over it like it's sacred, because it is. Quirky historical tidbit. Some medieval households kept a hearth dog, a metal tool shaped like a dog that helped maintain embers and heat overnight. Real dogs helped too, of course, though they weren't always polite bedmates. Your real dog is snoring by the door. Useless. Finally, a bit of warmth spreads. Your nose starts dripping. Success. But warmth is temporary here. It's always on the run. And outside, the wind is just getting started. Historians still argue whether medieval winters were universally brutal or if perceptions varied by region and century. But the one thing everyone agrees on? If you were poor, winter hurt more. And you? You're not exactly feasting in a castle. You're trying to stretch the last of the root vegetables, figuring out if shriveled turnips still count as food. You're worried about wood, worried about wool, worried about that weird cough your neighbor has, and it's only December. You stare at the little fire and wonder, can you hibernate? Just skip ahead? You know the answer. You pull your cloak tighter, press your back against the wall, and close your eyes. The cold is already creeping in. You wake up shivering. Again, the fire's gone out. Again, the tip of your nose feels like it's made of carved ice, and the inside of your house, your shelter, has decided it no longer wants to pretend to be indoors. A gentle crunch under your blanket tells you all you need to know. Snow. Inside. Again. You lift the corner of your bedding, and sure enough, a fine dusting of frost glimmers across the straw floor like some cursed medieval version of holiday cheer. You sigh, because this isn't festive. This is how you get chilblains on top of your existing chilblains. Mainstream historical fact: most medieval homes, especially peasant huts, were made of timber and wattle and daub with thatched roofs. These materials were breathable, sure, but that's just another way of saying wind and moisture could, and did, get in. There was no insulation, no glass in the windows, maybe a shutter if you were lucky. You roll onto your side and see your breath bloom like ghost mist in the cold morning air. You're starting to feel very close to your ancestors, mostly because you're about to join them if this roof leaks anymore. The thatch is sagging in the corner. A little drip-plop sound keeps you company like some grim version of water torture. You imagine what luxury must be like: solid stone walls, roaring fires, actual floors. But those belong to lords and monasteries. You get mud. Maybe some moss if you're fancy. You sit up and brush straw from your hair. Your blanket feels damp, not wet, just the kind of chill that makes you question if it's water, sweat, or sadness. Quirky historical tidbit. In some colder areas, families actually brought livestock indoors during winter, not just for protection, but to use the animal's body heat as primitive, central heating. Cozy in theory. In practice, loud, smelly, and very much not restful. You don't have a cow in here, thankfully. Just your uncle, who snores like one and smells worse when it's this cold. You crawl toward the hearth to revive the fire. You poke at yesterday's ashes, but all you find is disappointment. No embers, no magic, just a cold hearth that judges you silently. You blow on it anyway. Nothing. Fine. You toss on some twigs and pray to every saint you can name. It sparks a little. You blow again. This is now your cardio. Eventually, flames flicker to life. Weak, but alive. And in winter, that's enough. You huddle close. So close that your face starts to itch from the heat. Your toes, still wrapped in cloth and whatever passed for shoes 2 years ago, tingle. It hurts. You wonder if that means they're thawing or dying. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants adapted to the cold through physical resilience or sheer suffering. Some point to robust clothing techniques and social cooperation. Others point to death rates and shrug grimly. You stare at the ceiling. There's a hole. Not big, just big enough to let in a breeze that finds your spine and makes itself at home. You'd plug it, but with what? Your dignity? That left in November. You hear your cousin stir behind you. Then your aunt. The house begins to wake like some communal beast, groaning, coughing, and wrapped in layers of wool and complaint. Someone sneezes violently. Someone else immediately lights incense. Not for hygiene, for superstition. You scoot closer to the fire, pressing your palms against the stones. They burn, and you like it. It means you still feel something. Eventually, The others crowd in. It's an unspoken morning ritual. Gather around the heat like moths. You don't talk, not yet. Talking wastes warmth. Someone breaks the silence with a quiet grumble. The snow came in again. You nod. You don't even look. You just accept it. Because yes, it did. Like it always does. Through the cracks in the wall, under the warped wooden door, through the gaps in the roof that you keep promising to patch, but you won't. Because you can't. Not really. And winter? Winter always finds the way in. By the time the sun finally limps its way over the treetops, you're already outside, teeth chattering like clappers in a cracked bell. The air stings your face, not gently, not like a brisk breeze, more like someone slapping you with a frozen trout, repeatedly. Your mission this morning? Firewood. Always firewood. It's the currency of winter. And you're broke. You head toward the tree line with a basket strapped across your back, hands stuffed deep into your sleeves, trying to remember what your fingers used to feel like. Mainstream historical fact. Firewood was the primary source of fuel for most medieval households. Gathering, chopping, and drying wood was a constant year-round effort, and shortages were common in winter. Some manorial laws even regulated where and how peasants could collect wood, dead wood only in many forests. You reach the edge of the woods and start scanning the ground. You're not allowed to cut trees here, only fallen branches. Which sounds easy until you remember. You're not the only freezing soul with the same plan. Most of the good wood is already gone. You're left with damp twigs and wishful thinking. You pick up a stick. Snap. Too thin. Another. Damp. Another. Rotten. Eventually, you find something with actual heft. A fallen limb. Thick and damp but promising. You drag it out with your entire body weight and a few muttered curses. You're 3 sticks in when your toe hits something. Frozen mud? A rock? Maybe. You look down. A frozen squirrel. Quirky historical tidbit. In hard winters, some families were so desperate for fuel that they burned old tools, broken furniture, even dried animal dung. And yes, occasionally, a roadkill squirrel or two found its way into stew. Waste not, want not. You consider the squirrel. Then decide today. You're not that cold. Not yet. Basket slowly filling. You head back. The wind has picked up, of course. It always waits for you to be burdened before showing off. It punches through your layers like they're paper. You trudge on, limbs stiff. The path is icy. Your cousin once fell here and broke his ankle. He now claims he can predict weather changes with it. You believe him, mostly because it adds drama to the family. You skid once, catch yourself, a small miracle. By the time you reach your home, your cheeks are numb, your sleeves soaked, and your soul has aged a decade. You dump the firewood by the door with a grunt that's half satisfaction, half existential despair. Historians still argue whether peasants faced chronic firewood shortages due to overpopulation, feudal restrictions, or changing climate. The answer, like most things in the Middle Ages, is probably yes to all. Inside, your aunt is coaxing yesterday's porridge back to life over the fire. It's taken on a personality of its own. You eye it warily. She eyes your woodpile. You call that a haul? You grunt. She grunts back. This is how affection works in winter. You warm your hands by the hearth. The fire crackles as if pleased by your offering. You whisper a quiet threat to it. Stay lit this time. and it flares briefly, almost in agreement. Later, you'll have to chop the bigger logs. Your back already hurts thinking about it. And tomorrow, you'll do this all over again. Because no matter how much you gather, it's never enough. The fire eats everything, and winter never stops asking. The fire is going now, a little triumph burning in the hearth. It smells like wet bark and desperation, but it's warm, and that's all that matters. You hold your hands close, fingers twitching like thawed worms, and glance over at the breakfast spread, if you can call it that. There's porridge, again, made from oats if you're lucky, but likely barley or millet. It's gray, it's lumpy, it jiggles when poked. There's a crust of black bread hard enough to be classified as a medieval weapon. And of course, salted pork. You chew slowly, like you're trying not to wake up your taste buds. Mainstream historical fact: winter food in the Middle Ages relied heavily on what had been preserved. Salting, smoking, drying, and pickling were essential techniques. Fresh produce? A distant memory. Meat was often scarce for peasants, and when available, it was tough and heavily salted to survive storage. You bite into the pork and instantly regret it. The salt hits you like a slap from Poseidon himself. It's so strong your lips pucker involuntarily. This meat's been curing since late summer, back when you still had warm feet. You wash it down with water that's slightly icy and tastes faintly of the bucket, because it's the bucket. Your aunt slices a turnip thin and adds it to the communal pot. Turnips are eternal. They last forever in storage, mostly because no one's excited to eat them. But in winter, they become the VIPs of the pantry. Quirky historical tidbit. In some areas, people preserved eggs in lime water or packed them in ash to last through winter. Cheese was also buried in barrels of oats to keep it safe from pests. The phrase, "That's not your cheese," once meant literally, "Get your own barrel." You lean back against the cold wall and glance at the food stores. The pantry is a misnomer. It's a dark shelf in the corner with sacks of grain, a hanging string of garlic, and a few sad-looking apples that look like they've seen things. And honestly, they probably have. You remember when one of those apples rolled into a mouse hole last week. You retrieved it. You're not proud of that moment, but you were hungry, and medieval mice can't afford rent, so who really owns the apple? Outside, the wind howls again. You sigh and chew. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants had enough to eat in winter. Some records suggest caloric intake was shockingly low. Others show that well-organized manners kept food supplies steady. But even with planning, there were bad years. Crops failed. Rats visited. Salt stores ran low. And famine always hovered just outside the door. You eat slowly, rationing your bites like you're making a deal with the future. One chunk now means one less later. Someone coughs. You glance over. Your uncle, red-nosed, sweaty, definitely sick. You pull your bowl closer. He reaches for the ladle. You scoot farther away. Sickness means less food, fewer hands to haul wood, and more groaning through the night. And no, medieval medicine does not include orange juice and bed rest. You take your last bite of porridge and stand, stretching your back until it pops like kindling. Outside, the chores await. But your belly? It's mostly full, and that's a win. For now. The sky turns a cold, brittle blue as you step outside again, bowl tucked under your arm, because dishes don't clean themselves, even in the 14th century. Not that they ever truly get clean. Rinsed in snow and wiped on a tunic is the standard. Not FDA approved, The wind slices sideways across the yard, bringing with it that delightful medieval flavor known as frozen misery. You trudge toward the well, boots crunching over frost-locked mud. The rope is stiff, the bucket's stuck, and your fingers are already threatening to unionize. You give the bucket a solid yank. Nothing. Another. Then a creaking snap. Down it drops. You listen to it splash far below. Maybe. It's hard to tell if that was water or just your hope shattering against stone. Mainstream historical fact. In winter, medieval wells and water sources often froze, especially in northern Europe. People had to chip through ice daily just to access drinking water. Buckets and rope frequently snapped or stuck. In cities, frozen public fountains became social bottlenecks and occasional sources of conflict. You lean over and squint. Yup, ice ring at the top. Great. You sigh and reach for the iron rod used to break through. It's leaning against the wall, half frozen into the snow. Your hands scream in protest as you pry it free, but you channel your inner blacksmith and jab it down into the mouth of the well. Crack, crack, crack. It's oddly satisfying, like yelling at the sky with a stick. Eventually, water sloshes up. You lower the bucket again, carefully this time. It fills. You haul it up like some overworked medieval gym bro. Quirky historical tidbit. In colder regions, people sometimes stored water in barrels inside their homes to prevent freezing. Others just accepted that water would be ice by morning and kept chisels handy. Some wealthier households flavored water with hot wine or added warm stones to defrost it. You haul your bucket back toward the house. The water sloshes over your hand. It's so cold it feels hot. Then nothing. Numbness is the medieval blanket. By the time you get to the door, your wrist feels like porcelain. You set the bucket down with a grunt and flex your fingers, wondering which ones you'd miss least. Inside, your aunt dips a ladle in. Still cold. You glare at her. You've officially reached grumpy snow goblin level of winter fatigue. But the day isn't done. Far from it. You still need water for the animals. And for laundry. Yes, laundry. Because despite what you might imagine, medieval people did wash their clothes. Sort of. Just not frequently. And never happily. You fill another bucket and start the long walk toward the washing area. It's near the creek, which is now half frozen and fully cursed. You chip through a thin layer of ice with a flat stone, then dunk the clothes in. Your sleeves get soaked. Your knees are wet. The garments turn into stiff, flapping flags in the wind. You beat the cloth against a flat rock with the fury of 1,000 winters. Historians still argue how often peasants laundered their garments in cold seasons. Some suggest weekly. Others claim only when truly necessary, which could mean when it walks on its own. What's certain is that winter laundering was rare, uncomfortable, and avoided whenever possible. You rinse, wring, repeat. Your knuckles turn red, your breath clouds, and then, because this is your life, you slip on a patch of ice and land butt first in the shallows. Fantastic. Your tunic is soaked. You're cold and wet and angry at physics. You stomp home, leaving icy footprints and dignity behind. Inside, your cousin chuckles. You throw a wet sock at him. He deserves it. The fire crackles in sympathy. You wring out your clothes and hang them on a wooden peg. They'll be dry by next harvest. Maybe. Night falls fast in winter. One moment, you're squinting at chores in the grayish twilight. Next thing you know, the sky's gone black and the stars are blinking down like cold, ancient eyes. The air sharpens. The silence thickens, and the cold? The cold starts to feel alive. It seeps in through the walls like a rumor, wraps itself around your ankles, crawls up your sleeves, and settles behind your eyes like it's renting space. Inside, the fire flickers low. Everyone huddles close, not for conversation, but for heat. Words cost breath, and breath means warmth lost. You sit, knees to chest, wrapped in a stiff wool blanket that smells like smoke and wet sheep. Mainstream historical fact. In the Middle Ages, the concept of first sleep and second sleep was common. People often slept in 2 phases with a waking period in between, especially during the long winter nights that could stretch 14 to 16 hours. This midnight break was used for prayers, quiet talk, or even sneaking out. Right now, you'd be grateful for one sleep. You lie on your straw mattress, itchy and uneven, and try to find a warm spot that isn't already claimed by your cousin's elbow or your aunt's foot. You share this sleeping space with most of your family, and at least 1 cat, 2 mice, and something that might be a weasel. The fire dims further. The dark thickens, and with it comes the winter night noises. The house creaks. The wind whines. Branches scratch the roof like 1,000 bony fingers. A pot shifts somewhere in the shadows. Your heart skips once. It's fine. It's always fine. Probably. Quirky historical tidbit. Medieval folks often blamed creaks, groans, or drafts on night spirits or cold weather imps. It was common to hang protective charms or whisper prayers before bed, just in case something wandered in with the cold. You mutter one now, just in case. The darkness in winter feels different. It presses, not just visually, but in your bones, your chest, your mood. Time stops making sense. The night stretches out like a yawning tunnel, and your mind plays games in the quiet. Historians still argue whether seasonal depression, what we call SAD today, was recognized in medieval times. There's evidence that monks wrote about winter melancholy, and folk practices hinted at mood-shifting spells. But mostly, people endured it the only way they could, by lighting candles, sharing stories, and hoping for spring. You turn over. Your feet are still cold. You tuck them against your cousin's back. She grunts. You pretend not to hear. The fire pops. You stare at the ceiling beams, watching shadows crawl across them like slow insects. Outside, the wind moans like something lost. Inside, someone begins to snore. You close your eyes and let the darkness carry you halfway to sleep. Later, you'll wake again. You always do. That middle of the night limbo, neither asleep nor awake, just drifting, is as much a part of winter as the frost on the inside of the shutters. Eventually, you'll sleep. Eventually, the night will pass. Eventually. You wake before dawn again. Not because you want to, but because your leg is cramping, your blanket has migrated halfway across the room, and your left foot feels like a frozen root vegetable. Also, someone just rolled over and took your personal supply of body heat with them. Rude. You sit up in the dark, rubbing your eyes with one hand and your frost-bitten toes with the other. They wiggle a little. That's a good sign. You'll probably keep them. Probably. Now begins the great medieval ritual, getting dressed for survival. Mainstream historical fact. Contrary to the myth of dirty, naked peasants, medieval people did layer extensively in winter. Base linen shirts, woolen tunics, hose, cloaks, caps, mittens. These were standard. But for the poor, layering meant reusing, repairing, and sometimes wearing threadbare rags upon threadbare rags. You fumble around for your tunic in the dark. You find it by smell. It's stiff in places, thanks to yesterday's creek incident, and alarmingly damp in others. You throw it over your shoulders like a reluctant hug from a cold ghost. Next, wool hose, cold as snakeskin and twice as clingy. You wriggle into them like a worm entering a second skin. Then, your outer tunic. It was once brown. Now it's more of a has seen too many winters color. There's a patch on the shoulder. Finally, your cloak. Heavy. It smells like sheep. You feel like a walking bale of hay. Quirky historical tidbit. Some medieval peasants stuffed moss or straw into their clothes for extra warmth during harsh winters. Not glamorous, not comfortable, but surprisingly effective. You've done it yourself. Once. Let's just say it chafed in places no one should chafe. You top it off with a cap. Not stylish, but it hugs your head like a warm hand. You tuck your hair inside, stuff your sleeves closed with string, and exhale a plume of mist. You are now 40% wool, 40% wet, and 20% spite. Someone else stirs. Cold, they mutter. You nod, because what else is there to say? Outside, the sky is starting to lighten, but only slightly. That dim, bluish gray that whispers, "Get up anyway. I'm not getting brighter anytime soon." You step out, immediately regret it. The air smacks you full in the face, sharp and clean as a knife. Your breath floats away like a tiny ghost of hope. Historians still argue about whether medieval outerwear evolved more due to climate changes or fashion, but when it came to winter, function always beat form. Except for the nobles. Nobles loved their fur-lined cloaks and feathered caps. You? You'd wear a dead badger on your head if it meant 5 more degrees of warmth. You walk down the path to the barn. Your boots crunch over frost. They're held together with leather laces and stubbornness. You hope they last another week. The wind kicks up and finds the hole in your sleeve. It snakes down your arm like an insult. You hug yourself tighter and keep walking. You're dressed, you're still cold, but you're moving. And in winter, that's survival. You're feeding the chickens when it hits you. Your uncle's cough has upgraded. It echoes through the yard like a medieval death bell, wet, deep, impressive in its misery. You pause, a fistful of barley midair, and wonder whether you should burn the bedding now or later. You finish with the chickens. They peck sluggishly. Their water's frozen. Again. You crack the ice with a stick and mutter the peasant's daily prayer. Please don't let the pig be dead too. Mainstream historical fact. Winter illness was a major cause of mortality in the Middle Ages. With cramped, damp homes, limited nutrition, and no germ theory, diseases like pneumonia, tuberculosis, and influenza ravaged communities every cold season. Monasteries sometimes acted as the only places with even rudimentary medical care. You check on the pig. Still breathing. Good, because if it dies, it's both a food loss and an omen, and you really can't afford either. Back inside, your uncle's wheezing like a haunted set of bagpipes. He's propped up near the fire, wrapped in every blanket you own, which means the rest of you get to reenact who can shiver quietest for the evening. Someone suggests mustard plasters. Someone else wants to use garlic and holy water. Someone else, your grandmother, just smacks a wooden spoon against the wall and says, "Rub him with goose fat and pray." Quirky historical tidbit. One common cure for winter illness in medieval Europe was tying a toad around the neck or placing it in a sock worn to bed. Other treatments included heated onions, bloodletting, and powdered antlers. None of these were based on science. All of them were applied with alarming confidence. You fetch the goose fat. The house smells like livestock and menthol now, which is somehow worse than just livestock. Your aunt boils water and adds herbs. Thyme, sage, a few crushed garlic cloves. It won't cure anything, but the steam is warm and hopeful, which is as close to a cure as you're going to get. Historians still argue whether folk remedies were pure superstition or contained useful empirical knowledge. Some herbal infusions did have mild antibacterial or soothing effects, but in the absence of sanitation or understanding of viruses, most treatments were placebos, or worse. You sip your share of the herb broth. It's earthy, sharp, slightly bitter, kind of like your personality by mid-January. The door creaks open. Your cousin returns, face red from wind, holding a bundle of foraged twigs and a single dead crow. You're not sure what the crow's for, but he looks proud, so you nod and toss another log on the fire. Later, you sit by the hearth. Your uncle sleeps fitfully, coughing between snores. Someone reads from the Book of Hours, not for entertainment, for luck. You listen to the Latin words blend with the wind outside. The fire crackles. Your throat itches a little. Number not today. You wrap yourself tighter in your cloak and stare at the fire. The sick rise or they don't, and all you can do is wait. Morning breaks with a whimper. The house is darker than usual. The frost on the inside of the walls has thickened, crystallizing into tiny white ferns that creep along the edges of your world like quiet invaders. Even the fire, though still glowing faintly, feels reluctant to do more than smolder. You check your uncle, still breathing, barely. You breathe out slowly in relief, or maybe exhaustion. It's hard to tell anymore. You rise, creaking like the furniture, and stretch your arms toward the ceiling beams. One of them has a new drip line, a steady plink-plink of meltwater into a warped wooden bowl. You add roof repair to the list of impossible tasks. But first, there's soup to stir. Mainstream historical fact. Soup was the centerpiece of winter meals for most medieval households. Thickened with barley, lentils, or stale bread, it was often the only hot food available, shared communally, and consumed for days at a time, topped up and reboiled daily to preserve its heat and prevent spoilage. You ladle the leftovers from last night's pot, a limp stew of turnips, carrots, and mystery bits, into your wooden bowl. The top layer has congealed into a film. You stir it back in like it's a secret. You eat slowly. The warmth spreads from your throat to your stomach like a tiny fire, barely enough to register, but enough to remind you you're still alive. Your cousin joins you, hair like hay, nose red and dripping. She gestures toward the window with her spoon. Tracks, she mutters. You peer outside, animal prints in the snow. Hoofed. Probably a deer. Maybe a boar. Maybe something worse. Quirky historical tidbit. Medieval Europeans believed in more than just wolves or bandits lurking in winter woods. In parts of France and Germany, stories circulated of the wild hunt, a ghostly procession of hunters, horses, and hounds said to sweep across the land in the dead of night. Seeing it was an omen. Hearing it, a death sentence. You stare at the tracks a little longer than necessary, just in case. Then, it's off to collect snow. Yes, collect snow. Because water doesn't fetch itself, and the well is frozen again. You drag a bucket and a wooden scoop out into the white wilderness and begin your ritual, scraping snow into the container, trying not to let your breath fog your own vision. The silence is complete. No birds, no dogs, just wind and your own heartbeat. You fill the bucket, slow, icy, inevitable. Historians still argue whether daily chores in medieval winters were more physically taxing than in other seasons, or merely more miserable. What's certain is that everything, every single task, was harder when you couldn't feel your fingers. Back inside, you set the snow near the fire to melt. Your cousin is knitting, badly. You glance over her shoulder. That's not a sock. She shrugs. It's something. You nod. That's the spirit. Idle hands in winter are dangerous, both practically and superstitiously. So you grab a bundle of broken reeds and begin weaving mats. The rhythm is calming, your fingers moving automatically, even as they sting with cold. Someone sneezes. Someone else farts. The house continues its grim ballet of bodily sounds and barely contained hope. You weave and wait for the snow to melt. By midday, though let's be honest, it's hard to tell what time it actually is when the sun hides like a guilty dog behind clouds. The house begins to hum with quiet motion. Not energy, never that. More like a tired shuffle of people doing what must be done, powered entirely by momentum and a grim refusal to freeze to death. Your task today: repair the roof. Yes, that roof. The one with the dripping beam and the mysterious draft that smells vaguely of sadness and wet goose. Mainstream historical fact: thatch roofing, made from bundles of straw or reeds, was standard in medieval peasant homes. While insulating to a degree, it required constant maintenance, patching holes, repacking bundles, and sweeping off snow to prevent rot or cave-ins. Rethatching was a communal or seasonal effort, but minor repairs? Those were daily. You brace the ladder against the side of the house, a structure only slightly more stable than your cousin's sock, and begin to climb. The rungs creak ominously, as if they'd like to discuss your diet. You reach the edge of the roof. It groans beneath you, covered in a crust of half-melted snow. You squat low, shifting your weight like a very cold ninja, and begin stuffing dry straw into the leaks. This is a job for two hands. You have one. The other is frozen into a fist. You unclench it slowly, muttering curses not found in any holy book. The wind does its part, flinging bits of straw in your face like some kind of revenge-seeking scarecrow. You press the bundles down, wedge them between the timbers, and smear mud across them to hold them in place. It's an art, in the way coughing politely at a funeral is an art. Just keep doing it until nobody complains. Quirky historical tidbit. In some villages, roofs were repaired with layers of dung mixed into the mud paste for added insulation. Not fragrant, but functional. Some even claimed it kept evil spirits away. Others simply said it kept your nose too busy to care about ghosts. You finish patching the leak, feeling proud, wet, and slightly manure-scented. Climbing down is harder. Your boots slip once, and you nearly join your ancestors. But you catch yourself, mutter something heartfelt, and continue down to safety. Back on solid ground, you stomp your feet to get the blood flowing. Your toes tingle angrily. Inside, the fire has been fed. Someone is singing. Badly. It might be a lullaby. It might be a threat. It's hard to tell. You warm your hands by the hearth. Your uncle coughs again. Louder. Wet. You meet your aunt's eyes. She's worried. You both are. Historians still argue how much communal care medieval families gave the sick. Some accounts describe incredible support and close kinship. Others note that once someone became too ill, they were let go to avoid spreading disease. Either way, options were limited, and prayers carried more weight than poultices. The wind howls outside. You hear it in your bones now. Another storm is coming. You feel it. You sigh, pick up the cauldron, and get the soup going again. Roofs patched, fires lit. For now, that's enough. You step outside the next morning, intent on checking the chicken coop and maybe, just maybe, scouting for wild herbs along the edge of the woods. But the wind greets you with the full-force slap of reality. It drags at your cloak, pricks your cheeks with invisible pins, and makes it instantly clear. Today is not a travel day. And honestly, neither is tomorrow. Because medieval winter roads, they're not roads, they're ambitions. Mainstream historical fact. Most medieval roads, especially those used by peasants, were little more than packed dirt paths, easily churned into mud in fall and frozen solid in winter. Travel was often halted for entire weeks due to snowfall, floods, or impassable terrain. Bridges were rare, and those that existed were prone to collapse. You kick at the snow-covered path leading to the nearest village, 3 miles away, normally a half-day's walk. Today, it's hidden under a layer of sleet and mystery. Your neighbor once tried to make the trip in a storm like this. They found him in spring. Or rather, they found part of him. The rest, well, wolves need to eat too. You shuffle back toward the barn. Inside, the goat sneezes at you, which feels personal. You check the hay supply and find it lower than it should be, which means another chore, hauling more from the shed behind the house. The shed whose roof caved in last year. Of course it did. Quirky, historical tidbit. In remote areas, people used snowshoes made of bent willow or woven reeds to navigate deep snow. Some even wrapped sacks around their boots for extra traction. Wealthier travelers relied on sleighs or wagons with iron runners, but peasants made do with desperation and a good walking stick. You grab a stick. It's more ceremonial than useful, but it makes you feel like you're doing something. The shed looms ahead, half buried, slumped like an old drunk. You pry open the door and are immediately greeted by a cascade of snow and one very annoyed-looking rat. You both scream. You apologize. It doesn't. You haul out a bundle of hay, coughing from the dust, and struggle back across the yard with it balanced on your shoulder like a sad, itchy crown. Historians still argue whether winter isolation was more psychologically taxing than the cold itself. Letters and church records from the period hint at cabin madness, a mix of melancholy, hallucinations, and deep spiritual despair that came from being snowed in for weeks with the same 4 faces and no escape. You return indoors with your hay and a 1,000-yard stare. Your cousin asks, "Was it bad?" You nod. Words aren't necessary. You both sit down. She resumes spinning thread. You resume trying not to hear your uncle cough in a new and alarming key. Someone mentions needing to check the well again. You pretend you didn't hear. Outside, the snow begins again. Soft at first, then thick, determined, smothering. Any paths you cleared will vanish by dusk. Any chance of visiting the blacksmith or the priest, gone until the thaw. Travel? In this question mark, you chuckle. Not unless you're desperate, or foolish, or both. You settle by the fire and wait for spring like it's a person who owes you money. Even in a season that feels like it's been designed to crush your spirit and slowly turn your feet into icicles, there's one strange salvation: celebration. Because somehow, despite the frostbite, the starvation, and the mystery illness count ticking upward like a morbid scorecard, the medieval calendar insists that winter is festive, or at least tries to be. Mainstream historical fact: winter was filled with religious feast days and social observances, especially Christmas, Epiphany, and Candlemas. These weren't holidays as we think of them, but deeply spiritual events with long masses, fasting before feasting, and rare moments of communal merriment. For peasants, it often meant a break from labor, brief, cold, but sacred. You trudge to church wearing all the clothes you own. The sleeves of your tunic are patched with mismatched wool. Your cloak drags through slush. Your mittens are more finger-shaped holes than fabric. And your boots are holding together by force of will and two frayed leather thongs. The path is icy. Of course it is. You slip once, catch yourself, and mutter a quiet curse. Your aunt hisses that it's Candlemas, and you'd best watch your tongue. You mumble an apology, half to her, half to the sky. The church is dark, stone walls, high ceilings, no heat. The pews are frozen planks of penance. Your breath fogs in front of your face as you kneel and pray, mostly for the Mass to end before your toes fall off. Quirky historical tidbit. During long winter services, it wasn't uncommon for people to carry small foot warmers, iron boxes with coals, or hot bricks wrapped in cloth. Peasants rarely had these luxuries. They relied on body heat and prayers. Sometimes both failed. You watch your cousin fall asleep mid-hymn and list sideways onto the bench. You nudge her gently. She doesn't stir. You consider joining her. Eventually there's a feast. Sort of. It's turnips again. And a communal pie made from whatever the village could scrounge. There's a boiled pudding the color of secrets, and cider so sharp it makes your lips twitch. You laugh. You can't help it. Even the worst cider is still cider. And you're surrounded by neighbors, all similarly wrapped in scraps, all similarly exhausted. But for a moment, the shared misery feels like unity. Historians still argue whether winter festivals were genuinely joyful or merely temporary distractions from hardship. Certainly songs and games were part of the ritual, but so were long fasts, rigid church rules, and social tensions simmering beneath the surface. You play a game of Snapdragon with the village boys. Dried fruit is dropped in hot candle fat, and you reach in to grab it before the flames burn your fingertips. Fun, in a I might lose a finger kind of way. You win a shriveled raisin and the admiration of a girl who says she liked how your sleeve caught fire just a little. You feel something stir in your chest. Hope? Warmth? Nope, just indigestion from the pudding. You smile anyway. The night ends with hymns and a procession around the church. Candles flicker in the dark, reflecting off the snow like scattered stars. For a moment, you forget how cold you are. You forget the coughs and the cracked lips and the dreams of hot baths. For a moment, it's beautiful. You head home by moonlight. The wind bites less tonight. Or maybe you just don't care anymore. Either way, you sleep deeply and dream of fire that never dies. The celebrations are over. The last crumb of pudding long vanished, and the cider jug stands sadly empty in the corner. Now begins the true test of your peasant prowess, surviving on what you've hoarded. Which, let's be honest, wasn't much to begin with. You wake to the sound of your aunt rooting through the food chest like a raccoon in a panic. She lifts a cloth, pokes at something gray and fuzzy, and sighs. I think the cheese turned. You sigh too. It was more of a cheese-adjacent lump to begin with. Mainstream historical fact, medieval peasants relied heavily on preserved food in winter. This included salted meats, smoked fish, pickled vegetables, dried fruits, and stored root crops like onions, carrots, and turnips. If any of these spoiled, there was no backup plan, just hunger or worse. You're down to a few wrinkled apples, some suspicious dried peas, half a sack of barley, and one salted fish that smells like regret and shoe polish. Still, you try to get creative. Your cousin suggests a stew. You suggest boiling the wooden spoon and calling it broth. Humor helps. A little. In the corner of the room, a jug of lard sits squat and noble. It's been used for everything: cooking, candles, wound dressing, and, on one memorable occasion, lip balm. You hope it lasts the month. Quirky historical tidbit. In some areas, people buried preserved food in underground pits to keep it cool and safe. The trouble? Animals often found them first. There are recorded complaints of pigs unearthing entire salted haunches of venison. If you ever doubted pig intelligence, this will change your mind. You didn't bury anything. You wish you had. You wish you'd hidden something from the family hoarders. Your brother-in-law has a habit of sampling the smoked meat during his midnight checks. You try not to hold it against him. But also, you kind of do. You ration the barley, measuring it out like gold dust. The resulting porridge is gray and gloopy, but warm. You sprinkle salt on it sparingly. Your stash is low, and you know you'll need some for whatever meat you might dry come spring. Historians still argue whether winter starvation was endemic across all peasant communities or more localized to areas hit by failed harvests or poor planning. Either way, even well-prepared families faced the hunger gap, a time between January and early spring when supplies ran critically low. You stretch your food longer by thinning your portions. You pretend you're full. You lie well enough that even your stomach starts to believe you. One afternoon, you go foraging near the tree line. You find wild onions. One? It's more bulb than onion. Still, you carry it home like treasure. Your aunt claps when she sees it, then slices it so thin it disappears into the pot. Later, someone barters half a jug of ale for a handful of dried mushrooms. It feels like a miracle. You bite into one and realize they're the chewy kind, the kind that might be edible or might send you into a 3-day vision of talking goats. You eat it anyway. You're not picky in February. By now, the family has gotten used to small meals and long silences. You talk less, chew slower, stare at the fire longer. You dream of eggs, of apples, of bread so fresh it still breathes. Instead, you gnaw another piece of dried carrot and try to smile. Spring will come, eventually, and when it does, you'll bury next winter's food like it's a holy relic. Lesson learned. You've been indoors so long, the beams of the house feel like part of your skeleton. Every creak, every cold draft, every familiar smell. Cooked onions, soot, wet wool, and something vaguely animal blends into a strange kind of comfort. You don't love it, but your brain has surrendered. It's home now. It's your entire universe. And with that claustrophobic peace comes the creeping madness. You're not alone in this. Cabin fever, while not a medieval diagnosis, is practically a family member. Mainstream historical fact. During the long medieval winters, it was common for entire extended families to sleep, eat, and live together in single-room homes, especially in poorer communities. Privacy was non-existent. Tensions rose, arguments flared, but mutual survival kept people from fully snapping, usually. Today, your cousin has accused your uncle of stealing extra barley. He denies it, chewing suspiciously. Your aunt bangs a ladle against the cauldron and declares the next person to talk during mealtime will have to clean the latrine pit. The room falls silent like a dropped prayer. You chew your thin stew with dignity and dread. The boredom hits hardest in the middle of the day, after chores are done, and there's nothing left to patch, stir, or sweep. You try spinning thread. You try playing a game of knucklebones. You even try carving faces into firewood, one of which now looks unsettlingly like the village priest. Your sister notices. You both laugh for the first time in 2 weeks. Quirky historical tidbit. In some villages, people entertained themselves in winter by telling ghost stories, performing puppet shows with wooden dolls, or even reenacting local legends using livestock as stand-ins for historical figures. It wasn't high art, but it was something. Today, you try shadow puppets against the firelit wall. Your dog is unimpressed. Your cousin pretends to be asleep, probably because last time you tried a comedy routine, it involved 3 jokes about flatulence and a surprisingly accurate impression of a goose. Tensions rise again when someone misplaces the bone comb. Your brother shouts. Your sister shouts louder. You shout loudest and end up holding the comb because that's how medieval arguments work. Volume equals victory. Historians still argue whether medieval domestic conflicts were largely ignored, accepted as normal, or managed through village elders and ecclesiastical courts. What's clear is that small grievances during long winters could fester and sometimes explode. You make a peace offering, a joke involving a pig, a priest, and a suspiciously shaped loaf of rye bread. It earns a chuckle. Dinner is quiet, but not angry. Afterward, your family gathers around the hearth. Someone begins humming a tune, low, repetitive, calming. Others join in, slowly, until the room is filled with a gentle harmony. Not polished, not pretty, but human. You lean back against the wall, staring at the soot-darkened ceiling beams. The fire pops. You let your eyes close. Just for a minute. Just long enough to forget the aching cold. Just long enough to remember why, despite everything, you still haven't walked out into the snow and kept walking. You're still here. You're still surviving. Even if someone did eat the last piece of smoked fish, you'll forgive them tomorrow. Maybe. Outside, the snow has melted just enough to reveal the thick, matted brown underneath. Mud, trampled hay, the occasional hopeful green blade peeking out like it's unsure whether the coast is clear. You stand at the threshold of the house, wrapped in the same patchwork cloak, staring into the cold drizzle. It's not spring yet, but it wants to be. Maybe. Mainstream historical fact. Late winter and early spring, called the Hunger Gap, were the most dangerous time for medieval peasants. Food stores ran critically low, livestock births hadn't peaked, and foraging opportunities were scarce. Many deaths occurred not in the deep freeze of January, but in the deceptively mild misery of March. You step carefully over a slush-slicked step and squint at the sky. Gray, always gray, but the air smells different, less icy, more earthy. Damp stone, rotting straw, the faintest suggestion of growing things. Back inside, your aunt is rationing the last of the salt. One heel of bread left, a little oil, The mood is quiet, like a breath held too long. Someone mentions the equinox. Someone else spits. Superstition, or maybe frustration. You can't blame them. Your uncle's cough is better, though. The fever broke last week. Now he's back to chewing through barley like a stubborn ox. It's a relief and an annoyance. The goat gave birth. Tiny, wobbly legs, giant eyes, ears like question marks. Hope in the shape of an animal that will eat everything it sees. Quirky historical tidbit. In some regions, families named the first baby animal born in spring as a charm, believing it could carry their survival into the new season. Others whispered wishes into its fur or tucked scraps of last year's harvest under its bedding for luck. You pet the kid and whisper nothing. Just lean into its warmth for a second longer than you need to. The roads are still too wet to travel, but the snow's retreating. You saw a bee yesterday. One. It flew into the side of your head and vanished. Still counts. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants ever truly recovered between winters or simply endured until age or illness claimed them. Recovery meant a successful planting, healthy animals, and no new taxes from the manor. That trifecta rarely lasted. You help your cousin hang linens outside, even though they'll just smell like wet wool and disappointment. You do it anyway. You pick at the last apple. It's mushy and bruised and half of it's gone. It tastes like memory, like sunlight. You don't talk much these days. None of you do. Words feel like luxuries, better saved for when the flowers bloom or the roads firm up, or someone asks what day it is and you can actually answer. But you catch yourself smiling more. Just a little. You dream of clean hands and clean clothes and a full bowl. You dream of grass under your feet and bees that don't collide with your forehead. You dream of a spring that comes on time, like a promised guest with dry boots and stories from faraway villages. You don't know if you'll make it that far, but you're still dreaming, and in a medieval winter, that's everything. You sit by the hearth again, but this time, something's different. The fire doesn't feel like a desperate necessity. It feels like a friend, familiar, steady, no longer fighting off death with every flicker, just offering light. Your home still creaks. The wind still slips through the shutters. But the edge is softer now, the chill less hungry. Even the silence hums with gentler rhythms. Someone hums in the corner, maybe your cousin again. It's a slow tune, ancient and wordless, the kind that wraps around your ribs and reminds you what it feels like to belong. The world outside is thawing. You can smell it. You can almost hear the ground loosening its frozen grip, the soil turning over in its sleep. You press your back to the wall and close your eyes. The weight of your cloak settles around your shoulders like a lullaby. You think about the snow, the cracked boots, the stew that tasted of boiled wood, the laughter that came anyway. You think about the goat, the onion, the single defiant apple, and then you stop thinking. Because now you're warm. You're safe. You've made it. The worst is over. Let that thought carry you to sleep, soft and slow. Let the wind fade into white noise. Let the fire whisper, "Shh, you're okay now. You're okay. Good night."